Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I thought that we'd do another period drama review video. Now it's been a few weeks since I've done this. In fact, if you look on the channel it's only 3 or 4 videos ago. But for me personally it's been quite a while since I filmed the reaction to my last one, which I think was me and my sister doing our review of Bridgerton. So this is going to be a little bit different. The Bridgerton review was very much like our raw thoughts, what we thought about the show itself, and kind of it was nice to have two different opposing views in terms of like my sister who sees period dramas very differently to me. This period drama review is going to be a little bit different because I wanted to kind of look more at the kind of choices made in the kind of genre of historical fiction and period drama at the moment, in context of how we as consumers watch the show, but also in the way of how writers and creators are kind of playing around with the entire genre of historical fiction at the moment. So that's what this video is going to be about. I am going to review My Lady Jane, but I am going to be reviewing that in the context of also reviewing a book, which is this one by Alison Weir. It's called A Dangerous Inheritance, and it's purely coincidental that I happen to be reading this book, which does cover the story of Lady Jane Grey, and more specifically her sister Catherine, but Lady Jane Grey's story is in there, and also the fact that I was wanting to watch My Lady Jane as the next period drama. So I was like, the worlds hath collided nicely. Let's do a little bit of a crossover between book, period drama. Now, I'm aware that My Lady Jane is adapted from a book. I have not read that book. Having said that, I do think that's going to feed in quite nicely to the discussion that I'm having here about books versus TV shows and how different people interact with different genres of historical fiction. So yeah, just wanted to get that out in the open. I have not read the book, the novel about My Lady Jane. This is purely period drama and then historical fiction novel, and we will be talking about the two together. So in an attempt to not make this too long, I will send another caveat, in fact 2 little caveats. First, spoilers. Always. I'm always going to talk about spoiler alerts in period drama review videos because I have to talk about the whole series. And I did have somebody on one of my other period drama reviews say that I didn't talk about the ending enough. And I think I was very conscious in that video that I didn't want to spoil it. But I am going to be discussing the end of this series. So if you've not seen My Lady Jane yet, then I recommend that you stop right now, go away and watch it, and then come back when you've watched it, and then, you know, you can see if your thoughts compare to mine then as well. There's no point in watching a review before you've watched the show, otherwise it colours your own personal opinions of the show. The second caveat is that I'm not going to be able to cover everything. I'm not going to be able to cover all of the different topics around this particular period drama, and people often say that in some of my period drama review videos, oh, you didn't talk about this and you didn't talk about that, and I talk enough. I'm a very talkative person. I already talk too much on these things. If I sat here and just had an endless chat about every single aspect of a period drama, I honestly think it would probably be longer than the period drama itself. So we need to take little themes and we need to cherry pick bits and pieces to talk about, which is what I'm going to do in this video. So let's get into it. I think that what I'll do is I'll try and structure this in a way of, I'll give you my kind of thoughts about My Lady Jane, then I'll talk to you about A Dangerous Inheritance, the book, and then we'll go on to talk about kind of both together and the ideas and concepts around playing around with historical fiction and what we as creators and writers can learn from that. Okay? Does that sound good? Good. So, My Lady Jane. I have to say, I didn't know that there was a fantasy element to this show, and so the point within like the first 5 minutes when the maid turns into a bird and flies away, I was like, what? It was a bit of a strange moment, was that. So I was a bit like unsure of it as a concept. I didn't understand why there had to be this element of people turning into animals. For me, in the very first episode, I was like, it's not needed. I don't need a fantasy element to this. I just want the period drama. I just want the history. I was corrected, and I will stand corrected. I think the Ethians versus the humans kind of subplot of the storyline actually was developed really well throughout the rest of the series, and I liked the fact that it's making a very obvious reference to class and class structure and kind of the feudal system and that kind of thing, but I liked the fact that there was that going on. I think it added richness to the kind of the world and the story, which at the beginning I was a bit like, this is a bit random, why is this happening? Before that though, one thing that I really liked was the fact that they started with the actual history of Lady Jane Grey and a very kind of potted, this is what actually happened in history. And then the narrator says, but what if that didn't happen? And then says that, you know, we're not going to be following history now. It's such a clever way to write into the script because it sets the tone right from the beginning. It says, okay, we're not going to treat you like idiots. This is the real history. But what we're going to tell you straight from the off is don't get upset with what we're going to do, because pretty much all of the rest is a fantasy reimagining. And it's a bit on the nose, it's a bit obvious, but I kind of like that because it tells you straight from the off what to expect, but in a fun and creative way. It wasn't a boring historical kind of little introduction. It was fun, and it was told and narrated in the same tone of voice as the actual show is as well. And I thought that was really clever because it kind of blended the two together. It kind of made them seamless whilst also making it very explicit that they were separate as well. Thought that was very clever. The only problem that I had with the narrator was that the narrator was male. And for a show that is so much about female agency and the character, you know, Lady Jane Grey and, you know, Princess Mary, Princess Elizabeth, there's so many leading female characters in this show that for me it would have been nicer to have a female narrator to be narrating it. I'm not sure who the narrator was supposed to be. I think it was just a random voice. Unless I've missed something really obvious there and it's one of the characters that's narrating it. I don't believe it is. I think it's just a random male voice. So it could have quite easily been a random female voice. And I think that would have made it nicer. In fact, it almost would have been nice if they'd have done the narrator as the real historical Jane Grey. And she'd have been like, this is what actually happened to me. But fuck that. I want to know what could have happened in another parallel universe, something like that. I think that would have been a cooler concept because history is historically up until the kind of last 50 years, history's been told through the male gaze. It's been told by men, and it would have been really nice to play on that subtext a little bit as well, because the one thing I think about this show is it's really clever. When I first started watching it, I was like, I am not sold on this. It's treating the viewers like idiots. And there's an element of that. Like, I can see that the show's tried to appeal to a number of different audiences. So people who just want something in nice dresses, it's based in some point in history, but people don't really care when in history it is. It's got romance, it's got chivalry, it's got a bit of fantasy. It leans in hard to the romantasy genre. You know, the Fourth Wing, the Throne of Glass, the ACOTAR type books. It leans into that quite a lot in the visual film sense. But underneath that, there's some real serious historical context and some historical accuracies in and amongst the inaccuracies, which are obviously there for a reason. And I just thought that what on one level I thought was probably a bit simple actually is a lot more nuanced than I first thought it was. So yeah, overall, I thought that was really clever. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about that in a second. I thought the humour was fantastic. There were a couple of slapstick moments, and again, it comes back to this idea of trying to target multiple audiences. There was a little bit of the dialogue, I thought, was very stunted at times. You could hear that some of the actors had almost really slowed down their speech and they were almost over enunciating their words, and I was like, why are they doing this? And then I thought, it's Amazon, they'll be trying to appeal to a global audience, people for who English isn't their first language. So then I was like, right, okay, well in that context it broke something for me in terms of, like, not the fourth wall, but it made it obvious for me that the actors were acting, and I hate that. I hate it when I can tell that somebody's acting, and sometimes it comes from someone overacting, and there have been some times before where I'm like, oh god, this is cringe, I can tell this person's acting too much. Generally, it got better, so I don't know whether it was like I don't know if it's a conscious filmmaking tool. It may well be, and I'm just ignorant of that as the way that films like this are made. It might be something that people do purposefully in a first episode in order to get people kind of used to a way of speaking, used to a way of diction, used to a different accent or something like that. But for me, especially in that first episode, it reduced great actors down to like almost like they were learning how to act again. It kind of clouded the first episode for me, to be honest. I was a bit like, not sure about this. But then as I got into it, and it did speed up a bit, the dialogue sped up a bit more, and it was a bit more nuanced than the first episode. I did think it was really, really good. Now, there are things that I noticed that were quite historically inaccurate, mainly around costuming, and some of the set dressing wasn't quite right, and there were a few little bits and pieces, like the bedding ceremony had mainly fallen out of kind of use by that period, but there's a lot of individual bits and pieces that I thought, do you know what? We've already been told in the very first episode that we need to leave off with history. This is a reimagining. And so I very consciously, about halfway through the first episode, was like, I am turning my mind off from what's historically accurate for this period and what's not. To be honest, most of the inaccuracies I could see were made for the reason of making the show either more visually appealing or kind of fit in with that romanticy, that chivalry, that medieval knight style. And I was like, okay, some of these aspects are a couple of 100 years out of date. I don't mind, because it makes it fun, it makes the world nice and visual. And I'm leaving off with historical accuracy. People don't turn into birds historically. So I'm not going to start going off on one about historical accuracy here. But there were a couple of nice little things that I really liked that told me that the person who was writing it does know about history, does know about British history, does know about this time period. And that for me kind of helped, because it was like, okay, you do know what you're talking about in that sense, but these things have been left off on purpose because it is a fantasy, it's a creative reimagining. So for example, they were using the river quite a lot for travel between the big great houses and the palaces. That historically would have been the biggest form of transport of the time, was by river, by barge, especially in London, and going up and down the River Thames, visiting the great houses by barge. That was the primary mode of transport around London, because it was right there in the middle of the city, and it allowed people to get out and to get fresh air and not be caught up as much in traffic. You know, we think about now of central London being gridlocked. It's exactly the same then. You had narrower roads, you had carts, horses, wagons, all that kind of thing, humans blocking up the roads. And so, especially for the elite, for the royalty and the court and nobility, the ability to walk from your garden down some steps and into a barge that would take you along the river, and then you'd get off, walk up some steps and go into your friend's house or your family member's house or a palace, meant that you didn't have to deal with the low people. You didn't have to deal with the people of London. You didn't have to deal with going into places that might be diseased or just smelly. Just not very pleasant places to be. And so I liked that. I liked the fact that in the very first episode we had Lady Jane and her mother travelling on barge down to another property. Which brings me on to the other thing that I really loved, was the fact that they filmed on location. I feel like such a broken record these days saying this in period dramas, but I love it when period dramas film in old buildings. And for me, I'm much more forgiving looking at a building that was built 200-300 years before or after a show is set, than them creating a set where you can tell that stone and wood and other textures are made of polystyrene. And that's what I really loved about this. You could tell that time, money, expense had been really put into making sure that the set, the locations were beautiful and were really kind of visually appealing. And it just lent to the immersiveness of the world. And even the Tower of London, they obviously haven't filmed at the Tower of London because it's not the Tower of London when you look at it, but they found something that feels quite like it. And they've obviously found a kind of a property somewhere in the UK that has that kind of tower in the middle with the walls around the outside. And I was like, brilliant. You know, I know it's not the Tower of London, because to be honest, to film at the Tower of London, I should imagine costs a fortune, if they even let you. But yeah, it's one of those things, I just think it works so much better. There's quite a lot of outdoor scenes in My Lady Jane, either in gardens or in the woodland or in like surrounding areas, and they've found proper places to go and film on location. It just made it so much better, and I have to say that was probably my favourite thing about the whole show, was visually the setting and the world. It made me want to go to that particular time period. I did think that some of the costumes were strange. They'd obviously spent quite a lot of money and time on some costumes, and then on others they almost looked really cheap and not well done. Overall though, I thought the costumes were beautiful. I thought that the women's gowns, I just thought were absolutely amazing. And I've always loved that kind of Tudor Elizabethan silhouette. I've always kind of loved those gowns of that period. And I thought they were really lovely. They didn't go too daft, like they didn't go too modern. We've seen so many shows and films of this period where they kind of reimagine the gowns and they make them kind of modern, or they have they just take it a bit too far out of historical context. They didn't do that. I think that if you really want to go into absolute historical accuracy in terms of costumes, you probably can. But again, we're not supposed to be thinking about historical accuracy. This is a different world. But overall, I thought that it was great. I loved the fact that when she and Guildford finally had their big amorous scene, she had like a silky negligee on. I thought that was beautiful. And I liked the fact that they dressed Guildford in kind of like a black, sober Tudor outfit for all of the show. Overall, like I say, I liked the costumes. I thought overall they were very good. And I liked Catherine Gray's costumes. I thought hers were very good as well. So yeah, I think overall I really liked it. I thought the humour of the show was brilliant. I thought some of the moments just made me absolutely laugh out loud. There were some, especially I think little Margaret's scenes, because she was so coarse, for want of a better word. She would swear a lot and she'd be like, oh, that, I'm not doing that, and this, that and the other. I just thought that her character was brilliant. And I also liked Stanley Dudley, which I don't know, again, we're not getting into historical accuracy, but I don't know if Stanley Dudley was a real character. I suspect that they may have swapped out Robert Dudley for Stanley Dudley, because Guildford did have a brother called Robert, and Robert Dudley is the brother who eventually went on to have, basically he was more or less the love of the life of Elizabeth I, and I don't think either Stanley Dudley was a completely separate brother, and there may be 3, 4, 5 brothers, and the whole idea was to introduce Robert Dudley later down the line as a love interest for Bess in season 2 or 3 of My Lady Jane. I'll come on to that in a minute. Or they've just decided to kind of get away with Robert Dudley and pretend he didn't exist and bring Stanley in as a bit of a kind of other brother, really. I did think Stanley Dudley's character was a bit over-exaggerated. Everything was a bit over-exaggerated. So some of the kind of storylines were a bit over-exaggerated. And it was a bit cliche at times. The mother who has the father's dead and we're poor, so you have to marry this man to get money back. It was a bit of a trope. And actually, I've seen other people say that the show is just basically almost taking the piss out of all of these different tropes that we see in period dramas. And once I read that, I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense, it would be a trope. So then I was kind of looking out for them. And there was the other one when she and Guildford were in the woods and they were attacked by the 2 henchmen. And she turns out to just happen to be an amazing swords person. And she's got all these amazing skills with a sword. And they're all like, oh my God, who'd have thought a woman could be good with a sword? And I'm just like, but I get it. It's supposed to be funny. It's supposed to take the piss out of the trope. So I think things like that were quite good. And then there were the moments that totally shocked me, like when Margaret killed Lester. And I was just like, that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. In terms of characters, all of the different characters I thought were brilliant. I thought the actor who played Jane, I thought she was fantastic. Apparently she's American, but she spoke with such a brilliant British accent. You wouldn't have known that she wasn't an English actor. I thought she was fantastic. I actually thought the chap who plays Guildford Dudley, he was very Very, I'm going to say chivalrous again, but it was that kind of exactly what we want from the leading male. I thought Mary, Princess Mary, was fantastic. I don't think I've seen that actor in anything, but I thought she was absolutely phenomenal. She was so funny, and I just loved the fact that they made her into a dominatrix. I mean, that dominatrix outfit, she had that chainmail collar on and the black leather corset bustier thing. I was like, wow, that is a nice outfit. So yeah, I thought that Princess Mary was fantastic. I thought her character was great. And yeah, she just had a really good story arc. I thought that was a really brilliant idea because again, Mary was known for being brutal. She was known for being really harsh with her religious rule and her religious laws, and the fact that she tried to enforce Catholicism back on the country, and she became known as Bloody Mary, informally, by history, has coined her as Bloody Mary. And I like the fact that they played with that a little bit. They kind of played with that character and made that about kind of her character. I really, like I said, I loved Rob Brydon. I thought he was fantastic. Yeah, I thought Catherine Gray's character was fantastic as well. I don't really think there was anybody in the show that I thought was surplus to requirements, like an extraneous character that we didn't need. The only person maybe was Leicester, but the Duke of Leicester, but it was a weird one. Earl Leicester? Duke Leicester? I don't know what he is. Anyway, I thought his character was a little bit superfluous. I don't really know why he was there, other than for the trope of beautiful young woman has to marry an old man in order to save the family fortunes. I think that was what it was there for, that storyline. Oh God, I could just keep going. This is the problem. I could keep going about this show. I thought it was great. I love the way it ended as well. I feel like we got the ending that we wanted. You know, Jane and Guildford are together. They're happy. They're in love, and they're, you know, starting their kind of married life together now that a lot of the threat has been neutralised. You know, Mary's been taken away, etc. But I like the fact that they left a lot of it open. Obviously, I think Mary's still on the throne. Yes. Gosh, I only watched it last night. I don't know why my brain has stopped it. But Mary is still on the throne, but the king is, you know, he's coming back and he's ready to reclaim his throne. And there were all these kind of little storylines that were left open, and I just thought it was brilliant. And that's why it's such a shame that the show has been cancelled, because I really do think we could easily have a season 2. Now, I don't think this should become one of those shows that goes on and on forever. I don't think that, to be honest. I think you could probably do 3 seasons and have 3 excellent seasons and have it as a fixed term series. In the next season, it would be great to see the king restored back to the throne, and then maybe he hands it over to Jane. I mean, I don't think Jane needed to be queen. I don't think her character was made to be a queen. But at the same time, I would quite like to see her ruling, because I thought that what she tried to do when she was on the throne was really good. But maybe she'll become like an ambassador or an advisor to the king. It would be great to see the king take his throne again, and then have this kind of court of the Privy Council made up of women instead of men, and to be really playing around with gender. The king hasn't become Ethian yet. That's another thing that I would really love to see, that development of the storyline. And Catherine Grey got married at the end of the season. Again, I want to see that come out. What's going to happen with little Margaret? I think there's a lot of potential, but unfortunately it has apparently been cancelled. So that's that, really. So I think I'm going to leave that there in terms of talking about the show. I think I've probably been talking for about half an hour already. I probably had to cut a lot of that out, which brings me on to the next point. I am going to post a full-length version of this video, so all of my thoughts on the show, to my Patreon for my lovely patrons who are currently scrolling on camera. So if you want to hear all of my thoughts about My Lady Jane, which I've recorded but probably had to cut out for this video, if you want to hear the full-length version, then please do consider becoming a patron. Thank you very much for those who are my patrons, and if you want to find out more, you can go to my Patreon, which is in the description box below. So, Let's move on to Alison Weir, A Dangerous Inheritance. So Tom's mum actually brought me this book when she came over recently, and she thought that I'd like it because it's about women in history, so obviously I'm going to be intrigued. And basically it's a story about Lady Catherine Grey, the sister of Lady Jane Grey, and it kind of spans two time periods because it's Lady Catherine Grey's story in the mid-1550s and also another Catherine, Catherine Plantagenet, back in the 1480s. So it's a bit difficult at times because they're both named the same thing, but the writer Alison Weir has named one Kate and the other Catherine to kind of help with keeping an eye on who is who. And the idea is that Kate Plantagenet is Richard III, the king in the car park, Richard III's illegitimate daughter, but she's been brought up in the household of Richard, his wife Anne, and their children. And so she is a noble daughter for all intents and purposes, even though technically she is illegitimate. And the story follows her and Catherine Grey kind of parallel. They're both 14-ish, I think, when the book starts, 13, 14. And it's Kate in 1480s and Catherine in the 1550s. And their kind of stories parallel. The back of the book is a little bit misleading because the back of the book is all about Catherine Grey wanting to find out what happened to the princes in the Tower who were killed by Richard III, and then Kate, who is Richard III's daughter, kind of also wanting to know what happened to the princes as well in real time. And it kind of talks about Catherine Grey being in the Tower of London and trying to find out, but actually that happens right at the end. The kind of main context of the book is following these two women who are the same age and 80 years apart and kind of following their lives through the British court. And it does narrate the kind of the marriage of Jane Grey to Guildford Dudley, and then her being thrust onto the throne when she was 17, I think she was 17, and made to become Queen Jane. And then it does chart her being arrested, taken to Tower of London, and eventually tried and beheaded. And it was just really interesting to be reading this book at the same time as watching the show, because obviously even at the beginning of the show they talk about the fact that Jane is she was called the 9 Days Queen because she was only queen for 9 days before she was arrested and beheaded. And they talk about that right at the beginning, and then obviously they reimagine the story in the show. But it was much different reading this and reading her actual story. And you read it through the perspective of her sister. You don't get Jane's first perspective story, which I'm quite glad about in a way. But you get it from Catherine's perspective. And it's just where My Lady Jane is very light-hearted. It takes a very serious topic and it kind of introduces you to it on a surface level. The book, A Dangerous Inheritance, really went a lot deeper into the history and into the female position at the time and kind of what women were and were not able to do and how much power or lack of that power women had during the 15th and 16th centuries. So, yeah, it was a really, really interesting read. And basically, it kind of, because it's, so... trying to organise my thoughts. Because it's historical fiction, there is some dialogue and some scenes that are reimagined and that kind of thing. But Alison Weir is a very, very well-respected historian of women's history, and she writes in her author's note at the back that a lot of the events, a lot of the letters, a lot of the dialogue are taken from real historical documents. Now, obviously, there's no recording of conversations, but there are letters between characters. So letters between Catherine Grey and Edward Seymour, there might have been a letter, but she's made it into a spoken scene together where they talk it to each other rather than doing it via letter. So there's little bits like that where she's fictionalised the kind of situation. But where a lot of historical fiction is maybe 20% fact, the setting, the time period, the characters are factual, but then 80% of the setting around it, the storyline, the dialogue, this, that and the other is fictionalised. With Alison Weir's book, it's 80% fact and 20% fiction. And it's a really, really interesting read because of that. There were parts where I was a little bit like, oh, this is getting a bit boring, or it was just a lot of politics. and a lot of discussions around Richard III's movements and what he was doing and why he was doing it, and a lot of his kind of decisions behind his attempt to become king and what he did when he was on the throne. And I wasn't as interested in that bit, but the bits about Catherine and Kate and kind of their stories were really, really well written. And then to read to the end and read that like 80% of it was absolutely true was just fantastic to read, because I love historical fiction. It's my favourite genre. I've read a lot of historical fiction, and I always end up finishing the book thinking, well, that was fantastic, but I'd love to know how much of that was actually true. And so it's really nice to have actually had a book to read where I can rely on quite a lot of the dialogue, a lot of the events that happened, and a lot of the information to know that it's actual historical information. For me, that makes this almost like a new type of historical fiction that I've not read a lot, and it's something that I really want to read more of. I'm definitely going to read more of Alison Weir's historical fiction books. So in terms of which to enjoy, which format of story would people enjoy, I think there's time and a place for both. You can enjoy both. And I think it's really interesting from a writer's perspective, or from a creator's perspective, to think about the way that history at the moment is being not rewritten, but is being presented to audiences. There are different formats for people who want to experience it in different ways, and no single format is the correct way. Arguably, My Lady Jane probably has had more people watching it since it's come out recently than readers of Alison Weir's book. Now, having said that, Alison Weir's book has been out for 11 years. It was published in 2013. So in 11 years, it probably has had a very, very large readership versus the show. Are people still going to be watching My Lady Jane in 11 years? I don't know. We will. I probably will in 11 years watch it again and keep watching it, like I watch all my favourite period dramas from the early noughties now. But I don't know if something like My Lady Jane will be able to move with the times in the same way that a historical fiction novel like A Dangerous Inheritance by Alison Weir can do, because it's based more on fact. And I think that's interesting. It comes down to who are you creating for and why. So if you want to make something at the moment that is very much of the times, very much what an audience is looking for and is enjoying right now, then something like My Lady Jane, creating a script, creating a project, even writing a book that sits within that trend is one way of creating. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's the same when people kind of have a go at romantasy writers, people like the writers of ACOTAR and Fourth Wing books. Aside from issues with the authors, which I don't know too much about, to be honest, but I understand that they are a little bit controversial. Aside from that, let's take that out. Let's just not consider that for a moment. Let's assume that they are fine as authors. The subject matter, that kind of romantasy, the romance and the fantasy and the blending of that together into spicy books, as some people call them at the moment, is trendy. It is trending at the moment. It's content that people want to consume right now. So there's a choice. Writers have a choice to make at the moment. If they want to write a book, you can write the book that's in your head, whatever it happens to be, or you can make a choice. You can say, okay, I can see that at the moment romantasy is a big genre. It's very popular. There's a lot of people producing romantasy books and publishers are looking for them. Therefore, I want to write a romantasy book. I don't have a romantasy book in my mind. I'm going to be honest, I like to consume them. I don't particularly like to write them, but there's nothing wrong with that. So it's really interesting. It's a really interesting concept. I think that we are going to see more shows like My Lady Jane, Bridgerton. What else have we had recently that's played with that kind of genre? Oh, there was that one about American heiresses that came over to England. Kayla's going to be shouting at the video at this point because she did a whole review on it and I can't think what it's called. It was very, very obviously trying to appeal to a much younger audience, and it could be that some of these genres, the Bridgertons, the My Lady Janes and things like that, are trying to appeal to that slightly younger audience. And I just think it's for me as a writer, it's really made me think about the way that I can craft historical fiction and the different avenues that might be open to me as a creator, that I could look at doing something that is humorous. Funny period dramas do not really exist. And I think it's something that really could be done more, because I really enjoyed the humour in My Lady Jane, and I think there is a room for a little bit more humour in period dramas. So yeah, I think overall, a very interesting concept. I definitely think that if you enjoy historical fiction, if you've watched My Lady Jane and you want to know a little bit more about the real stories, the real kind of women's experiences at this time, then I definitely think you should read A Dangerous Inheritance. It's really, really interesting. And Kate Plantagenet's story especially is really quite sad. In fact, both the women's stories are sad. They end with their deaths, and it does take them all the way through from being 13, 14 until their deaths, does the book, and it tells their stories, and neither of them are particularly happy endings, I'm just going to tell you that now. But it's really interesting, and I think it's a really good next step. If you want to introduce yourself to a bit of history with My Lady Jane, but then want to go a bit deeper into the history and want to learn more of the facts behind the show, now you've been introduced to it, now you've been intrigued. And I think that's the great thing about shows like My Lady Jane. At the end of the day, it's getting people interested in history. It's getting people interested in women's stories especially, and that's what we need. We need more female history in our period dramas and in the historical fiction content that we consume. Right, I have talked. I've got a job on me now to get this edited down in time. So thank you very much for watching to this point. If you have watched this far, I want you to put a horse emoji in the comments, because Guildford turns into a horse and it's just so funny how many times Guildford is a horse is said throughout the show, and it just made me chuckle every single time somebody said it. So yeah, put a horse emoji in the comments if you've watched this far. Thank you very much again for watching this video. Thank you to my patrons, and thank you to everybody who's subscribed to my channel. We are inching closer towards 1,000 subscribers, so I'm really looking forward to when we can celebrate that together. So if you have watched this and you're not subscribed at the moment, I create videos of period dramas, books, history, writing. I am a published writer of non-fiction, and I'm currently writing my first and second novel. I'm writing 2 novels concurrently because I'm mad. I do all of that around a full-time job in marketing, and so sometimes I will publish content about my life as a freelance marketer, and I throw a couple of little vlogs in there every now and again as well. So if that kind of thing, a little bit of cosy content, books, historical fiction, period dramas, writing vlogs, ambient stuff is your bag, if all of that sounds good, then please do consider subscribing. And to everybody who is already subscribed, whether you're new or old, thank you so much for being around. Hit the like button and share the video if you can, that really helps YouTube to know that I'm creating content that people want to see. So a huge thank you for that. Right, I'm gonna go get a drink because I'm really thirsty. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching again, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.